Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. It's an online platform for science and engineering professionals. The first offering of the platform is Teach the Geek to Speak. You can actually learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. I also have a membership, a monthly membership called the Teach the Geek to Speak Society. You can also learn about that at teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Dr. Lorien Pratt. She studied computer science in school, and then she got a few degrees after that. She must really like school. Once she left school, she has been quite busy, an expert in machine learning and decision intelligence. She is a chief scientist at Quantellia, a software and consulting company offering machine learning and decision intelligence software and services. She's also author of the book, Link, How Decision Intelligence Connects Data, Actions, and Outcomes for a Better World. I'm interested to learn more about her motivation to study computer science, the decision to focus on decision intelligence and machine learning, and the goal for writing her book. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Dr. Pratt.
Well, thank you, Neil. What a great program. And thank you to your guests for taking the time to listen to me today.
Excellent. So I mentioned in my intro that you studied computer science. What was the motivation to do that?
As a kid, my parents were kind of super good at telling me I could do anything. My mom was a feminist, and my dad took me to watch 2001. And I thought HAL, the computer that killed everybody, not for that reason, but I thought that was pretty neat that we could have an intelligent computer assistant. So like at the age of 7, I sort of had the bug that was cool. And then in high school, I'll admit it, Neil, I met a boy. And he was a coder, and I wanted to impress him. I was 14, so I taught myself BASIC to impress a boy.
Wow.
And the rest is history, right?
Interesting. Wow, that's the first time I've ever heard that. Did it work?
Not really. That was but it sure did. It sure did help the rest of my career. So I'm eternally grateful to him.
Wherever this guy ended up, who knows? It's like I knew this little girl back when I was in high school. She knew coding, but I didn't really care. But I thought her friend was cute though. No, I'm just saying. No, but yeah, it certainly worked out for you. But then you didn't stop there. You got a master's and a PhD in computer science. So what was the reasoning for getting your graduate degrees?
Well, I started out getting a bachelor's degree at computer science at Dartmouth, which is the university that invented BASIC. So I went there because it felt like one of the most innovative computer science places in the country. And after Dartmouth, I was recruited into IBM, and IBM was pretty cool, but I felt like I really wanted to be pushing the envelope as opposed to taking technology that had been invented several years back and implementing it. And so went to visit IBM Yorktown Heights, where they were doing all these cool seminars, and talked to a few people. And they said, if you really want to be pushing the envelope and be a big innovator, getting your PhD is a really good idea. So I left IBM to get my master's, and then ultimately my PhD at Rutgers University in New Jersey.
Oh, wow. So you were working, and then you decided to go back to school to get your degrees. What was that transition like, going from being an employee, making money, to going back to being a student?
It was tough, and to try to mitigate it, I got IBM, and bless their hearts, they did this to give me an official leave of absence so that my job was safe. And so I was able to be a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, I mean, having a decent working person's, computer science salary, which was pretty good at the time, and then going back to graduate school and being kind of a starving graduate student was tough. At the graduate level in computer science in the US, most graduate students get teaching assistants or research assistantships, which is kind of a subsistence living. Mm-hmm. I didn't get one my first semester, so it really felt like a leap into the unknown. But don't you think, Neil, I think careers go that way, right? If you're not jumping off into a black hole from time to time, you're probably going to end up stuck. So it really took, kind of closing my eyes, not really knowing what was going to change, and believing in my North Star that I really wanted to be that innovative person that built HAL, right? I mean, that was kind of what was driving me. I knew I had to build some AI things.
Well, you know what? You're absolutely right about that, Dr. Pratt. I think a lot of, especially engineers, we get on these paths and we just think that this is the path you have to stay on. But it's from speaking to people like yourself, people that, started off someplace and then decided, I want to do something different, and they go off and do it. So it's always impressive when I hear from people like yourself, especially the idea of, as you said, you were making a pretty good salary, and then you're going back to being a starving student. Man, I wouldn't do it, but I'm glad you did.
Have you seen that meme where like the fiction is like there's a straight line and that's what everybody thinks a career path is, and then the reality is it's all over the place, right? And that's definitely been true. I've sort of leaped off a cliff a bunch of times in my career, and I've never really regretted it. It's scary, but it's always been worth it.
Yeah, no question. Same here. So
yeah.
So I mentioned also in the intro that you've developed this interest in decision intelligence and machine learning. So where did those interests come from?
Well, back in the 80s, which is when I was getting my master's and my PhD, machine learning was kind of secondary to AI. So the place I went to, Rutgers, had a pretty big AI department. So that's what attracted me to Rutgers, and when I wanted to leave IBM. But I just sort of had this rebel streak in me, because AI at the time was not about using data. It was about eliciting human expert knowledge, expert systems. And there was a lot of funding for AI in the 80s, kind of like the big hype cycle we have in AI right now. And I was a rebel, and I'm very grateful to my advisors at Rutgers. They let me be the only neural network person, and I kind of had to teach myself neural nets. And then what was kind of neat and sort of satisfying is fast forward 30 years, and now, the neural net backpropagation, multi-layer perceptron stuff that I kind of taught myself and that they let me teach myself turns out to be, the mainstream of AI. So, AI is bigger than machine learning, but machine learning is like right now 90% of a successful production deployed AI right now. So that's how I got into machine learning. Is I started in AI because of Hal, and then I realized, we can't model all of intelligence just with words and what we extract from human brains. We need to do something called subsymbolic AI, where intelligence comes from a subconscious world, and it's more granular, not just words.
Gotcha. I probably should have asked this question before, but I guess there's no better time than the present. So I did mention in the intro that you're an expert in decision intelligence. So I've heard of artificial intelligence. I've heard of machine learning. I've never heard the term decision intelligence. What exactly does that mean?
It means bridging the gap between AI and decisions. If we fast forward a lot, I've been kind of delivering AI solutions for about 30 years as of 10 years ago. And then I became a market analyst, or I had been a market analyst 10 years before that, where my job was to interview people who used technology. And there was this giant gap. I just assumed that if I was going to build this great tech, this machine learning, that there was some system out there that would take this great technology and use it for the hardest problems, like, these days, climate, COVID, pandemics, big business problems. And it was the strangest thing, Neil. I interviewed hundreds of people over the course of my time as a market analyst. And I learned that they could barely spell AI, let alone know what it was, right? And at the time, we couldn't even call it AI because it was in the AI winter, because AI had been overhyped. We had to call it analytics, and they couldn't spell that either. And so I realized there's this giant gap between, those of us kind of in academics and research who are incented to build all these new algorithms and be very creative, and, the people out there in the world, in governments and NGOs, nonprofits, as well as for-profit companies, that they weren't using the tech. So I invented decision intelligence on the back of a big round of interviews, where I asked people, okay, so if technology should be doing something for you that it's not, what should it be doing? And I started to get a really consistent answer, which is it should support decisions. This is a really long answer to your question, so invented DI, you could say around 2009, 2010. So DI is about going from actions to outcomes. So if I'm trying to decide whether I should do a podcast with Neil Thompson, that's a decision I'm making that leads to an action that I'm taking right now. but I'm doing this for a reason, and that's the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. And people make thousands of decisions per day, but AI, you'd be really surprised. AI is not about actions that lead to outcomes. AI is about labeling things and predicting things. And that's sort of like, you sit down at a restaurant and somebody serves you a bowl of chocolate chips and a bowl of flour. It's not quite the right format that's digestible. So DI kind of bridges this layer between AI, which predicts and labels, and humans who think in terms of decisions that lead to actions that lead to outcomes. So it's sort of this integration layer that connects humans to the tech and also connects humans to each other. It's like a blueprint, a way of drawing a picture of a decision that lets people see the decision and what it looks like. That's a really long answer. I hope that was helpful.
No, absolutely. And even if it wasn't, I was going to tell you that. That'd be kind of
no, never.
But yeah, if somebody served me some flour and some chocolate chips, they better follow it up with some eggs and butter and some sugar and then put it in the oven or something. Yeah, I need some chocolate chip cookies.
and that's what's happening. I mean, I'm working with lots of large organizations and governments right now, and their data teams are real frustrated because their only tools are these separate ingredients. And they don't realize that their customers don't need those separate ingredients. They don't want insights or answers to questions. What they really want to know is if they take this action, how will it lead to this outcome? And so DI kind of is this last little, like call it the last mile for AI to make it usable, to make it palatable, digestible, however you want to put it.
That's a really common sense, I guess, a way of kind of tying everything together. And you said that you're the one that came up with that. So again, kudos to you for seeing that, I guess, gap in what existed at the time and essentially inventing something to address that gap.
Yeah, I'd already done that once in machine learning. I invented something called transfer learning that's been pretty popular. So I figured I had, the ability to sort of see the future a little bit, which isn't magic. It just means interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people. So you sort of see the trends. So that's why I had kind of the belief in myself that if I carried through with DI, it would make it. And sure enough, it's on the Gartner hype cycle now. And it's recognized in Forbes, and I was on C-SPAN. So it's kind of cool to create an entirely new discipline. It's freaking hard, but we're finally starting to see it taking off the last year or so, which is really neat.
Out of curiosity, when you invented transfer learning or even decision intelligence, were there some that had some, I guess, pushback on your invention? And if so, how did you address it?
So anytime you try to sell something, it represents a paradigm shift. And I would say there's less pushback and more just people want to ignore you, right? There is certainly in academics with transfer learning, there were the hot topics back there, and it was back in the day, it was symbolic machine learning, as I said. And in decision intelligence, it's like, yeah, we've got a big machine learning budget, we've got a big AI budget, but we can't spend, 6 figures on decision intelligence. We've never heard of it. So people tend to kind of be copycats if they hear that something's hot and important. They don't want to be left behind. And so they'll jump on the bandwagon. But if you're not on the bandwagon they've heard of, you're not in fashion, you just get ignored. And I think the way I addressed it with transfer is I was just patient. It took 30 years before it took off. Yeah. And now it finally is. And with DI, I've just been evangelizing. I think the big breakthrough was to start a blog about DI. I really noticed a change in how many people were reaching out to me when I had kind of that authentic voice out there and people could understand kind of what I was actually talking about. And then the blog led to the book, and the book led to a lot of podcasts and NPR. And so it sort of built on each other. And I think the next big stage is we need a community. It can't just be the Lorien Pratt show. And that's what the book is really about, is sort of the community of people who are doing this. And these days there's thousands of people who are doing DI.
Gotcha.
Combination of blogging and, kind of outbound content and then community building.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question. I was going to ask you about the book. So what was, I guess, you kind of just provided the motivation for writing it, but then what, I guess, the audience for the book, who do you want reading this book, And what do you hope that they get out of it?
It's a really good question. And because I did a really weird thing. I wrote it for a non-technical audience because I realized in all of those interviews that the people making decisions were sort of bamboozled by the technical people, that the academics in machine learning were using a lot of jargon and were sort of like being impressive by being confusing. They were like speaking to impress as opposed to speaking to communicate. And, I like how you're laughing. You've been there before, Neil. We got to talk about this offline. So, I mean, I really just felt the pain of these decision makers who said, you know, I like the idea of making evidence-based decisions, of using AI, but I have no idea what the heck those data people are talking about. It's so confusing. And I had also done a bit of work kind of in the nonprofit sector in partnership with the Carter Center and, you know, folks that wouldn't necessarily be deeply data focused. And so I realized there was a real need for accessible, demystifying tech. I think for people like me, it's easy to write in a really academic voice. I mean, my parents are both PhDs. I have this academic voice. The challenge for me was, and I think this is what's really hard, is to take complex concepts and without removing their power to communicate them in such a way that people understand them. And I think there's a real sort of barrier that's created by those of us in tech who talk, and we need to recognize that this stuff needs to be democratized. We need to make it accessible and available to everybody. So I wrote the book with that in mind. So I actually had my mom in mind. She's 84. And I said to myself, my mom needs to be able to understand this book. And she's non-technical. She's an English professor, right? And so I tried to make it really super accessible. That was a conscious choice.
Wow. You basically just described the whole motivation for Teach the Geek, Dr. Pratt. I mean, in all honesty. So that's really why I started this. I was working as an engineer. I had to give these presentations in front of management, many of whom were non-technical. And oftentimes I'd get questions afterwards that I thought I'd answered during the presentation, but because I didn't present it in such a way that they could understand, now I'm still getting these questions. I got to stand up there in front of these people sweating bullets to answering these questions. I'm trying to get out of there as quickly as possible, but I never got out of there as quickly as possible because we always had these questions. And
I'm so glad you're doing this. I mean, I guess I'm just sort of like super underlining, you and me are both trying to solve the same problem, which is sort of this language, jargon, cultural barrier between the technical world and the world of the people that needs to use this technology. And I think we've both recognized, you know, with what you just said and me, similar experiences. I mean, I used to just bamboozle and nobody ever understood what I was saying, right? and it's so important as we mature in our careers that we learn to bridge these gaps, because the gaps create inequality, information inequality, tech inequality. And so, you know, it's sort of my purpose in life, and maybe yours too, to try to you know, get that inequity out of the systems in which we live.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that your goal is a little bit more noble than mine. At least at the time, my goal was just I wanted to get out of these presentations more quickly and not have to answer these damn questions. So if I put it in such a way they could understand initially, maybe I get less questions so I can get out of there and get back to doing my job.
Actually, I'm like you. I'd rather be coding than all this presentation stuff. But you know, it was a vacuum, and so I had to jump into it. But honestly, I'm with you. I would rather be coding right now in C# or R than anything else. So I'm with you. I get it.
So I mean, I mentioned also in the intro that you're the chief scientist, and I failed to mention that you're the co-founder of Quantellia. What was the motivation for starting your own business?
It was this gap. So, you know, I had done this pendulum swing from being a real geek, a PhD with 3 computer science degrees for a strange series of circumstances, like interviewing the buy side, being on the problem side instead of the solution, the technology side. And again, I'd seen this giant chasm and I was just shocked. I just assumed that as you got more senior in organizations, that people would be more careful and diligent about their decision making. And Neil, it's so weird. The opposite is true. As you get more senior, people are less rigorous. They use less evidence. They use less collaboration. And what we see is just sort of dominant personalities having their way rather than any deliberate, careful decision making. And that felt like, oh my gosh, if I could have like a 0.5% impact on the world in that regard, with these people who are impacting like human lives and trillions of dollars, and the future of the human race. When we look at pandemic, I mean, if I can affect that, that felt like really low hanging fruit. And so that just felt like a mission. That felt like a purpose. And so I gave up my high paying job and, really bootstrapped the company with my co-founder, Mark. We put everything into it. I sold my house. I went into credit card debt. I did everything. And I don't regret a moment of it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? I think a lot of people that jump off the cliff and start their own thing, they kind of have to go through similar kind of situations where you leave that comfort of that high paying job and you go off into this world of entrepreneurship where there's a whole lot of unknowns, but and it's possible that things won't work out. I mean, there's no certainty in it, but you do it because you see the need and you see that there's a market for it, and you have to have blind faith that this is going to work out. So again, geez, I've commended you like twice already. I haven't commended
Really
anyone
nice.
this many times in an interview. This is ridiculous.
You're very kind. I read somewhere that values are what gets you up in the morning. One of my clients, aim7.com, actually has that in one of their motivational videos. And I realized I have just this deep value for like trying to be generous as best as I can. And so I was really willing to sacrifice everything for, I was trained as a technologist. Maybe if I hadn't been trained as a technologist, I'd volunteer at the local homeless shelter, but that's what gives me a sense of purpose. Otherwise life just feels kind of empty. We have this really short life and, I won't be around forever. And I was starting to feel just this ennui, what am I here for? And filling that void was worth everything, right? Just having a sense that I can maybe contribute to something much bigger than myself and that I could leave a legacy. That's really powerful motivator. And that's what has kept me going through some really hard times. I had stage 3 breast cancer 3 years after I started the company and managed to persist through that. So yeah, it's been really hard, but worth it. I don't regret it because I have a sense of purpose, and I don't think everybody has that in life.
No question. I can attest to that. I've known many people that just kind of go through the motions. So yeah, definitely having that North Star, as you mentioned earlier, is it really kind of keeps you pushing forward. So I know for a fact that you are skilled in presenting in front of people because I checked out a couple of your TEDx talks. But is public speaking something you've always been good at? And if not, what'd you do to get better at it?
No, it's not something I've been good at. And let me say, speaking in general has not been something I've been good at. I think I didn't make good eye contact till I was age 22. I don't know if I'm on the spectrum or what, but I couldn't even really have small talk or have eye contact or talk to people at all. I guess my parents are college professors. And so I just got up in front of people. So just, teaching. I got a assistant professorship straight out of my PhD in '92, and just standing up every day and teaching to a bunch of people sort of drives that out of you. The problem with that is you've been reinforced for monologuing, right? And so, and then fast forward, and I'm an analyst, which is like a journalist, and I'm also reinforced for monologuing. So when I started my company, I just wasn't very good at a give and take kind of conversation, stopping and letting the other person talk. And I think it was feedback from my co-founder was one thing. He said, Lorien, let's do some back and forth. And then I got some great coaching as I did my first TED talk. The TED agreement came with a speaking coach. And then more recently, SAP had me teaching a course in their Academy for Engineering. And they also, as part of that deal, they put all of us instructors through a professional speaking course. And I learned to stand still and have gravitas in my voice and not to talk so fast and not to walk back and forth on the stage as much as I was. And so it did not at all come naturally at all. I think I always sort of knew it was important if I was going to have my purpose in life fulfilled, that I was going to need to be a bit of a talking head. And so I just, really embraced anybody who gave me feedback, tried to be really humble in the face of that, and tried to constantly be learning. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but I do my best.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, if you're the originator of decision intelligence and you want to get it out to the masses, I would assume that you'd wanted to try to do that in as many formats as possible. So you wrote a book about it, you blog about it, you speak about it. I mean, if anyone wants to know about decision intelligence, you got any type of format they want to learn about it. So I mean, speaking just seemed to be something that would have been obvious to do. Do you ever get nervous before you give presentations? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
Do I ever not get nervous before presentations? Maybe once a year I don't get nervous and before a presentation. And I think the only thing you can do is normalize it. And you can say everybody gets nervous. I guess the other thing to say, and I used to teach this when I taught at the graduate level, rehearse, give the talk to your plant or a friend or your dog 5 times beforehand, so that all of your cognitive energy goes to kind of the nonverbals and the speaking ability, as opposed to like you're thinking through what you're going to say for the first time. So that's a really simple piece of advice, but I know a lot of people don't do it. And so they end up with a lot of ums and uhs. So, if I was to give one piece of advice, that if there's one thing you should learn, it's just rehearse it a lot. Give the same talk a bunch of times till you're really comfortable. And people think that if you do that, you won't be natural. It actually makes you more natural, right? Because your brain isn't filled up with your thinking about your talk, and it allows you to just kind of chill and relax and be more authentic. So it's the one thing I would say.
I fully agree with you, Dr. Pratt. I have a friend and he makes fun of me for the fact that I practice my presentations beforehand. And he
should not.
I fully agree with you. I listen to his presentations too, where he wings it, and it absolutely shows. And just like you mentioned, there's a lot of filler words, a lot of ums, a lot of so's, and for some people that's rather annoying. I spoke to my mother about it one time, and she says she tunes out oftentimes if people use too many filler words. And that's not something that I tend to do. I will still listen if the message is something that I'm interested in, but I recognize that there are people out there that, regardless of the message, if you use too many of those words, they'll just stop listening. And that's unfortunate, especially if there's an easy fix for it, which is just practice before you give the presentation.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a few other things, like avoid jargon, right? Don't assume your audience knows all of these jargony words. Take the time to explain things to people. And then the other thing I learned, I learned this with my second TED Talk at can't remember the name of the place off the top of my head, but you need to, like, if it's on video, you need to just hit it right in the first 10 seconds. Like, just ask a really provoking question. Because if you take a long time, hi, I'm Lorien Pratt, today here's the goals of today. Don't do that, because if it's going to be on video, they will have tuned out by then. And so many talks, most of our viewers are going to be on replay, on YouTube, like this one will be, right? And so you just got to grab them in that first 10 seconds. That was probably something that I suffered from the most, is not being grabby enough right at the very beginning.
Yes, you have to grab people. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this has been really interesting. This has been great talking to you, Dr. Pratt. Thank you again for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
They can visit me at lorienpratt.com, LORIENPRATT. And then my book is called Link, How Decision Intelligence Connects Data, Actions, and Outcomes for a Better World. And you can get that book at linkthebook.com.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. Consider checking out the monthly membership, Teach the Geek to Speak Society. And you can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Dr. Pratt.
Thank you.